Dr. Catherine Darley. I'm a naturopathic sleep expert.
Can you tell me about your sleep journey?
Yeah, so I've always been a good sleeper, and fortunately, knock on wood, almost always. And I have really noticed for myself, if I don't get enough sleep, I like to get 8.5 hours, that it really impacts my well-being the next day. And one of the things that we know is that when somebody's chronically sleep deprived, they somehow lose that insight into how much it impacts you if you're not when they're not well rested. But if you maintain being well rested, then you really feel it even more.
How did you get into the field?
I've been in the field since I was in college. In college, I did some research projects, and that resulted in me getting an invitation to work for one of the leading researchers in kids' sleep, looking at children's sleep across development. And from there, I went on to medical school. I've done some time working as a sleep tech, doing those overnight sleep studies that people need. Children get overnight sleep studies too, and they need to in some cases. So I've really had a lot of different perspectives that I've looked at sleep over the course of my career.
So, can you tell me a little bit about sleep?
Yeah, so we have four stages of sleep, stage one, two, and three, which are non-REM, and then REM is its own stage. And over the night, we cycle through these stages. We have sleep cycles that last about 90 or maybe 110 minutes, and we will go from the lighter stages of sleep down into deep sleep, come back up to have a little bit of REM. REM is actually not considered deep sleep. It's its own stage. And then we'll come back to wakefulness. And often at the end of that sleep cycle, if you're watching someone sleep, they'll open their eyes, kind of scan the room, maybe adjust the covers, go back to sleep. And for people who have anxiety or depression, or they're feel unsafe in their bedroom, in their home, or whatnot, have a lot of worries on their mind, that wake up at the end of the sleep cycle may be long enough that they're aware of being awake and have to really actively work to get back to sleep. So you'll often hear people say, I wake up after 3 hours, which would be two sleep cycles, and then it seems like I'm up every hour and a half. And that's why people might have that experience.
Yeah, how does the lack of sleep affect someone's mental health?
It impacts our mental health in so many ways. Anxiety is going to be worse. Depression is going to be worse. If you take someone who is prone to having panic attacks and you sleep deprive them just by a couple hours, you can increase their risk of having a panic attack that day, which I don't know if you've ever had, but they are terrifying. You can increase, unfortunately, people, when they're not well rested, they have an increased risk of suicidality. So that's something that we are concerned about, of course, with people of all ages, but particularly with teenagers and young adults. We see that relationship quite strongly. And then it also, Michael, impacts our ability to get along with other people. Things as simple as when I come home and I look at my daughter, I can tell if she's happy or angry in just that split second read of her face and her body language. But if you are sleep deprived, you can't understand that as easily. And think about how if somebody's angry, you have to approach them and say something different to them than if they're happy. And if you're missing those cues, you're not able to respond appropriately, and that can impact our relationships over time.
You said you sleep around 8.5 hours. Is that the sweet spot, or is there a sweet spot?
I'm so glad you asked that because this question comes up all the time.
Yeah.
We do think for adults that adults need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours, but that doesn't mean that all adults will be just fine if they get seven. what it was really referring to is this bell curve where the majority of adults do need somewhere around 8. Some people need as little as 7. Some people need as much as 9 hours. And that's not them, it's not a personal failing. It's not them being lazy. We particularly see that with teenagers, that they get framed as lazy because they need more sleep. I think about it in terms of, it's analogous to how tall you are. How tall you are is not any kind, there should not be any judgment about that. It's not something you choose. It's just something you're given. And whether you're a shorter sleeper, a longer sleeper, middle of the road is really just a characteristic that you are given and, um, should not be blamed or shamed in any way.
I know for me, I live with bipolar disorder too, and sometimes I use sleep more like a stress reliever. Like if I'm super stressed and all that, I try to, take another nap or something like that. But is that healthy of doing multiple sleeps throughout the day?
It is completely fine to have naps. With naps, there's a couple strategies that we want people to keep in mind. One is about the length of the nap. Remember, I said you cycle through these stages. You don't want to wake up around 45 minutes into your nap because you'll be in deep sleep, which is when the brain waves are very high amplitude, very slow compared to the fast, short brain waves that we have in wakefulness or in REM sleep. And because the brain waves are so high amplitude, so slow, you're not going to feel very good. And it takes about 20 minutes for someone who wakes up out of that deep sleep to be with it and like have their cognitive function snappy as usual and all that. So you want to take a nap that's either short, 30 minutes or less, or give yourself that full hour and a half before you get back to those lighter stages of sleep. The other principle you want to think about is you don't want to nap so much or so late in the afternoon that it interferes with your nighttime sleep. So ideally, if people are going to nap about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or yeah, 2 to 3 in the afternoon, if you're on a later schedule. So you're getting it in shortly after your lunch is a better time.
What are some of the healthy sleeping tips?
Well, I'm a big fan, and it is based on science, to really have regularity. I think sometimes there's kind of a cool factor or a cachet about having an irregular schedule. Oh, I'll work when I feel inspired, I'll eat when I'm hungry, but really, routine helps our circadian rhythm and therefore it helps our sleep. The circadian rhythm is this 24-hour pattern of functioning that we have. Things like we digest much better during the day than during the night. And so you want to be waking up within about half an hour window every morning. And it's actually your morning wake up time that's more important to hold that steady than your nighttime bedtime. So sleep tips would be, to have a regular wake up time in the morning. And then the other one that might surprise you, although I think people are hearing about this more, is that at night you really want to replicate sunset experience, sunset colors, sunset lighting for 2 to 3 hours before bed. And
Wow.
that helps your brain shift into understanding, okay, night is approaching, sleep time is approaching, and I'm going to start shifting my physiology, shifting my organ function into being ready to sleep. And that makes all the difference. It makes a huge difference.
Do you think people would be better sleepers if they are more have more knowledge on the subject?
Sometimes knowledge doesn't translate into doing the thing. And that's true for me too. I mean, I know that potato chips are not good for me, and yet I still eat them at times. So, knowledge doesn't always translate, just because we're human, right? But I think that knowledge can, like with the light. If people try that or they use blue blocking glasses for just 7 days, you will notice a difference, absolutely, in the quality of your sleep and how easy it is to fall asleep. So I think, yeah, and that's why I like to do podcasts like this, because so often people go, wow, I didn't know that, and I'm going to
Yeah.
try it. So, if any of these tips resonate with you or your listeners, I suggest, just try it, give it a solid 7 to 10 days, and see how it works for you.
And there's so many different things that you hear online and stuff, but there's one that I do hear a lot with living with bipolar disorder too, or anyone with a mental illness, that you need more sleep. Is that true?
That certainly can be true. And we see that with people when they're in an active phase of depression, they'll need more sleep. And with bipolar, at times needing more sleep. And, sleep gets a bad rap in our culture. You know, a third of people are only getting 6 hours a night on work nights. And we just know that is not enough sleep for probably 98% of us. 98% of us cannot do well with 6 hours of sleep, but it's just kind of been framed as, oh, I'll be more productive the less I sleep. But actually, we know that people's actual performance declines the longer that they're awake, plus these mental health complications. So I really like people to dial into how much sleep they individually do best with. And there's a couple ways to do this. One, you can think back to a time that you were really well rested. If you remember a time, could be the last time you had, were unemployed and could just really get all the sleep you needed. Maybe it was before your kids were born. But think back to a time of how much sleep was I getting when I felt so good. The other thing that you can do is what I call the 10 by 10 test. This would not be for someone who has insomnia. This is really for someone who is habitually not getting enough sleep and they're curious about how much sleep they do best with. So the 10 by 10 test is 10 nights in a row of being in bed for 10 hours. And often when people do this, the first nights, they will sleep the whole 10 hours. You want to do all the things in terms of, having it be a regular time. You don't want the 10-hour time to bounce around. You want it to be really locked in, 10 p.m. till 8 a.m. or whatever the hours are for you. The other thing is to make sure that your bedroom is a really great place to sleep in terms of it is dark. And bedrooms should be so dark, Michael, that when you hold your hand out, like if you hold your hand out at arm's distance,
Yes.
you can't see your fingers wiggling. So the bedrooms really need to be like pitch dark and quiet and cool. All of the things to really make it a good um, kind of sleep cave, I think of.
And you said you've been on podcasts talking about this. How does it feel for you to be getting all this information you know so well out to the public?
I love it. I love it. I really feel like sleep is my life work. At this point, I've been in sleep medicine, as you can tell, with wrinkles, for decades. And I noticed just in the last maybe 5 years or so that more people are talking about sleep and talking about skills and just, at the grocery store and running into people in person, more people are saying, yes, I am really prioritizing my sleep and it makes such a difference. So I'm glad that maybe we're going to have a little cultural shift and it'll be less people who are only getting 6 hours a night on work nights.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
Well, I'm a big believer in nature cure. I'm not sure if that topic's come up with your work, but being out in nature actually improves our mental health. I'm a naturopathic physician, and so we really focus on that. I've done some trainings on nature cure, and the key is to be outside at least 120 minutes a week, which is
Wow.
only 2 hours. We know that gains increase up to 6 hours a week. So I make a point. I live right now in an apartment complex, so there's not a lot of nature right here. But I did a little research. 15 minutes from me, one in one direction, one in the other. There's some nature preserves, and so I regularly go there with my family, with the dog, and walk around. And one of them has some benches, and so sometimes we'll just sit and have a nice conversation and just be surrounded by the trees and all the birds and whatnot. And that's my mental health.
I asked earlier about sleep and mental health, but how can sleep affect your physical health?
Oh, it absolutely impacts your physical health. For one, we need to have rest. I think that's also an idea that's kind of gone to the wayside, and hopefully people will embrace the idea of just like we're not machines. We're not meant to be on for 16, 18 hours a day. But it impacts our hormones if we're not getting enough sleep. So that's going to translate into problems with weight control, with diabetes. If you are sleep deprived, you actually feel more hungry. It changes those appetite hormones, so you feel more hungry. And get this, you're more hungry for the wrong kinds of foods, for sugar, for fat, for simple carbs. When people are sleep deprived, they're not choosing the salads and the lean fish. They're going for those foods that we probably need to limit. And that's all because of the hormone changes. So there's many examples of that. Blood pressure absolutely goes up if we're sleep deprived, and that's a struggle for a lot of Americans is blood pressure, weight, blood sugar, cardiovascular disease risk increases, so does stroke risk. So there's lots of reasons. I think about sleep like kind of three main areas that we need to make sure is happening. One, which we've talked about a lot, is getting simply enough sleep quantity, enough hours every night. But then the second one is sleep disorders. There are actually 58 different sleep disorders, many more than, yeah, see, people
I
always
had no
respond
idea.
like
Wow.
that. Yeah, 58 sleep disorders. Some of them we hear about a lot, like obstructive sleep apnea, um, restless leg syndrome, insomnia. Those are the big three. And each of those affect probably somewhere between 10 and 15% of the population. So if you're having sleep problems, do talk to your physician and say, having sleep problems, can we at least do a screening interview? And they'll ask you about snoring and family history and those kinds of things. And then they'll decide, do you need to have an overnight sleep study or whatnot. And then the third piece is the timing. Like timing really makes a difference. We have some people who are more morning types. They get up, they're raring to go, they feel sleepy early at night. At the other end of the spectrum, we have night owls who really, their body is designed to be on a later schedule. That is actually more common among people who have mental health conditions. It's more likely that they'll be on that later schedule. And then about a third of us are kind of middle of the road, not strongly morning or evening types.
Where do you see your mission in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Well, I've done a lot of one-on-one work with individual patients, and I love it. I love that aha moment, those epiphanies that we have. And often when people come in for return appointments, before they even sit down, I can tell whether they're going to say that they're sleeping better because their whole body just moves more easily. You could just tell they're happier, or if they're going to sit and say, this is not working yet. Um, so that's great, but it is very one-on-one. In a day, in a week, I can only see a relatively small number of people. And so I am turning more to speaking about health and doing podcasts and doing courses. I have some online courses that people can get. I have a weekly newsletter that I'm just starting up on Substack called Be a Skilled Sleeper. And really, sleep is in many ways something that people can learn to do well. And that's what I'd like to do is my mission in the next 5 years.
You said, yeah, people feel happier and all that when they work, but do you see their confidence level rise as they go through the process?
Oh, absolutely. Lots of times for people who have insomnia, they will worry maybe periodically through the day, and then more as nighttime approaches, they'll worry about how am I going to be able to sleep? Am I ever going to be able to sleep well again? And having the knowledge of how to sleep well and strategies really does help them be more confident. And there's also that feedback where when we're feeling confident, something is more likely to go well than if we're feeling uncertain. And just even switching into that sensation of being confident is going to increase our success.
How can people reach out and learn more?
So you can find my courses at skilledsleeper.com, and you can join my newsletter on Substack. It's called Be a Skilled Sleeper, and it's just really a sleep topic. And then I have skills in there, so you're not just learning theoretically, that sleep impacts mental health, but some really hands-on do this, do this, do this, which I think is what people need.